The day after we buried my wife, my son stood up in front of the board and said, "Dad, you're finished. 25 years of sacrifice." And he kicked me out to steal our multi-million-dollar company. That night, while sorting through her old things, I found a sealed envelope she left behind. Inside was a truth so devastating it could burn down everything he built. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in my living room, still trying to make sense of how my own son could betray me in such a cold and public way. The boardroom scene replayed in my mind over and over, the way he tossed those papers across the table, the way he announced with a smile that I was no longer needed. I thought about everything I had done for him, the sacrifices that had built the foundation of his entire life. I remembered writing check after check for his college tuition, almost $60,000 in total, so he could go to the best schools without ever worrying about debt. I remembered the brand new car I bought him for $25,000 the day he graduated, thinking it would give him a good start in life. And I remembered the day I pulled $25,000 out of my retirement fund to keep the company alive during a downturn, believing I was saving not just a business, but a future for my family. Those numbers weren't just money to me. They were years of sweat, hours of work missed with my wife, dreams postponed. I had wanted to take her to Italy for our 40th anniversary, but instead we stayed home, living on beans and rice for months, because every dime went to making sure David had the life he wanted. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself love meant sacrifice. But now, looking back, I realized all those sacrifices had been turned against me. He hadn't seen them as love. He had seen them as entitlement, as stepping stones to take what he thought he deserved. That realization cut deeper than any knife. My eyes wandered around the house, this place we had bought for $200,000 back in the 70s, now worth nearly $600,000. Every corner of it carried memories of family gatherings, birthdays, and Christmas mornings when the kids tore open gifts under the tree. On the wall still hung our wedding photo, Margaret and I smiling, our hands clasped tightly. For decades it had been a symbol of everything we built together, of resilience and hope. Now when I looked at it, my heart tightened. That photo was no longer just a reminder of joy. It had become a bitter symbol of how our legacy was being torn apart by greed. The dining room table, once filled with laughter and warm meals, now sat in silence. The chairs around it seemed empty, hollow reminders of children who no longer cared for the meaning of family. I picked up one of the old family albums. There was David at his high school graduation, me standing next to him, my hand on his shoulder, proud as could be. There was Margaret, her face glowing with joy. And now those photos felt like lies. The warmth in them had been stolen, replaced by the cold truth of betrayal. Our home was supposed to be a fortress of memories. Instead, it felt like a courtroom, each picture, each object, standing as evidence of everything that had gone wrong. The contrast between past and present was unbearable. What once gave me strength now tore me apart. Later that night, when the silence became too heavy, I began sorting through Margaret's belongings. Her absence was still raw, and touching her things felt like trespassing onto sacred ground. I opened her dresser drawers, folded the sweaters she loved, and placed them carefully into boxes. That was when I noticed the old wooden box, tucked beneath her scarves. I almost missed it, but something about the way it was hidden drew my attention. The box was worn, scratched with time, but still locked. My hands trembled as I searched for the small key that hung from a chain she had kept in her jewelry box. I opened it, expecting perhaps letters from her youth, or maybe an old keepsake. What I found stopped my breath. Inside were papers, documents I had never seen. At the top of the pile was a letter in her handwriting, sealed and marked with my name. I opened it, and the words blurred as tears filled my eyes. She had written that she had discovered David had been hiding debts for years, debts he had covered by manipulating accounts at the company. She hadn't told me while she was alive, afraid it would break me, afraid it would destroy the bond between father and son. She carried that burden alone until the end. Alongside the letter were copies of statements, evidence of loans David had taken out in secret, evidence of falsified reports. My heart shattered. Not only had my son betrayed me, but my wife had died carrying the weight of his lies, protecting me from a truth she thought I couldn't handle. The pain doubled, cutting in two directions. I grieved for her silence, for the burden she bore, and I burned with fury at what David had done. The box wasn't just a container of papers. It was a weapon, one she had left behind, as her final gift to me. It was the truth, and truth had the power to destroy everything he had built on lies. I sat there, the letter in my hand, and felt the shift inside me. At first, I was paralyzed by the shock. I wanted to crumble, to sink into despair, to let the betrayal finish me off. But the more I read her words, the more I realized what she wanted me to do. This wasn't just about protecting the company. It was about honoring her. She had trusted me enough to leave this truth in my hands. She believed that I would know what to do. And slowly the fog of sorrow lifted. My pain transformed into determination. I whispered to her photo, "You carried this alone for too long. I won't let his lies stand any longer. I'll fight for you. For us." My voice cracked, but in that crack was steel. This wasn't just about being a victim anymore. This was about standing as a man who had something worth protecting. I thought of Emily, my granddaughter, always so kind, always asking about my health. She had no part in David's greed. She still saw me as her grandfather, not as an obstacle. She was the reminder that not everyone had forgotten the value of love. And maybe, just maybe, she was the one who deserved the legacy Margaret and I had built. The thought anchored me. The contrast between David's betrayal and Emily's innocence made my decision clearer. I could no longer sit idle. It was time to act. The phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from David, words dripping with false sympathy. He said he hoped I was okay, that I should take care of myself. For a moment I almost replied, almost pretended everything was normal. But then I looked at Margaret's letter again. I saw her handwriting, the lines where she begged me not to let him destroy everything. My chest tightened, and I deleted the message without answering. For the first time in years, I put myself before his manipulation. I turned off the phone. The silence that followed was powerful. Not lonely, but liberating. In that small act, I felt control return to me. He would no longer use words to pacify me, no longer feed me lies. I stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out the folder where I kept important papers. I placed Margaret's documents inside. It felt symbolic, like I was arming myself for battle. No longer would I let him dictate the terms. No longer would I be the father who gave and gave until nothing was left. I was ready to take back what was mine. The living room felt different now. I sat back in my old armchair, the one I had always used to read the newspaper in the mornings. Once, that chair had been a place of comfort, of routine. Tonight it felt like a throne, a seat of judgment. The ticking of the grandfather clock echoed louder than usual, not soothing but urgent, like a countdown to the moment when truth would be revealed. The walls seemed closer, the house smaller, but the determination inside me grew larger than the space around me. I looked at Margaret's picture on the mantel. Her smile seemed almost alive, watching me, encouraging me. I whispered again, softer this time, "I'll do the right thing, I promise you." For the first time since her funeral, I felt a sense of direction. The betrayal was real, the pain unbearable, but I was no longer drowning in it. I was rising. And as I sat there, the letter beside me, I knew the storm had only begun. The truth would not stay hidden much longer, and when it came out, it would level everything David thought he controlled. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after I read Margaret's letter, I sat in the kitchen staring at my cold coffee, and I knew the time for grieving in silence was over. My wife had carried that burden for too long, and now she had passed it to me. It wasn't just about my pride anymore, or about a father's heartbreak. It was about protecting the life we had built, the sacrifices I had made, and the promise she had written in her final words. I reached for the phone and dialed Richard Coleman, my longtime friend and lawyer, the man who had stood by us through lean years and prosperous ones. My hand did not shake when I punched in the numbers. That was the first sign. When Richard picked up, his voice calm as ever, I laid out the situation in a way I had never done before, without shame, without hesitation. I told him about David, about the boardroom humiliation, about the documents Margaret had hidden in the wooden box. There was silence on the other end for a long moment, and then Richard said, "Henry, we're going to get ahead of this. First, we freeze every account tied to your name. We'll cut off his access before he can bleed you dry." Hearing those words steadied me. I was no longer a man cornered. I was a man with a plan. By noon, I was sitting in Richard's office downtown. The air smelled faintly of old leather and coffee, the kind of smell that carried both tradition and authority. The secretary looked up from her desk and smiled at me. "Mr. Walker, are you doing all right? Do you need some water?" It was such a small gesture, but it nearly broke me. A stranger cared enough to ask about my health, while my own son plotted to erase me from my own life. That contrast sank deep into my chest, fueling the determination that had already started burning inside me. Richard came out of his office, extended his hand, and I gripped it firmly, not like the weak handshake of yesterday, but strong, certain. We sat down together and spread the documents across his mahogany desk. The letter from Margaret, the statements of David's debts, the evidence of falsified numbers, all of it laid bare. "This," Richard said, tapping the papers, "is not just betrayal. This is fraud. If he thinks he can get away with it, he's wrong." I nodded. My throat tightened, but my voice was steady when I replied, "He thinks he's already won, but he doesn't know I'm still here." That afternoon, we drove to the bank. I had dreaded this moment, thinking my voice would crack when I spoke to the manager, that my hands would tremble when I signed the forms. But when the pen touched the paper, I noticed something. My signature flowed clean and smooth, without hesitation. My grip was firm, my breathing even. The woman behind the counter, perhaps in her 40s, looked at me kindly and asked, "Sir, are you sure about freezing these accounts? It's a significant amount." I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Yes, lock it down, every dollar. No one touches it without my consent." The words rolled off my tongue with clarity, not the broken whispers of a man defeated. For the first time in weeks, I felt control returning to me. When I walked out of that bank, the sun felt warmer on my face, not mocking me, but affirming that I had taken the first step toward reclaiming what was mine. The next day, David showed up at my house, unannounced, wearing that smug smile I had come to despise. He carried a leather folder filled with papers, charts, projections, his weapons of intimidation. He laid them on the kitchen table as though he owned the place and said, "Dad, I know things have been tense, but if you sign here, we can make sure you're comfortable while I handle the company's future." I didn't answer right away. I let him talk, let him explain his grand vision, let him dig the hole deeper. He mistook my silence for weakness, just as he always had. He waved one of the sheets at me, pointing to numbers that were as fake as the promises in his voice. Inside, I boiled. Outside, I remained calm. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and watched. He had no idea that I had already frozen the accounts. He had no idea that I had Margaret's letter or the evidence tucked away with Richard. The arrogance in his tone, the gleam in his eyes, confirmed everything I needed to know. He wasn't just ambitious. He was desperate. Later that evening, I sat in my study going through my email when a message arrived by accident. It was from his assistant, forwarded to me by mistake. The subject line read, "Erasing the old man." My stomach dropped as I opened it. There, in black and white, was David's voice describing me as a useless relic, a roadblock that needs to be cleared, and instructing his legal team to prepare documents to seize the remainder of my shares, the same shares I had preserved with $25,000 from my retirement, the same shares that symbolized my entire faith in him. Reading those words was like taking a fist to the chest. I sat back, eyes burning, breath short. It wasn't enough for him to steal the company. He wanted to wipe me from its history. I clenched my fists and whispered into the silence, "Relic. We'll see who's a relic." That moment, as painful as it was, gave me clarity. His email was not just an insult. It was evidence. And evidence was power. The following morning, Richard and I met again. He had already printed the email and cataloged it with the rest of the documents. We began to piece together a strategy, not just defense, but offense. Richard pulled up public records on his computer, searching for anything connected to David. "Sometimes," he said, "these men think they're untouchable. They leave trails." And then he found it. My heart raced as he turned the screen toward me. There it was, A history of unpaid loans, a foreclosure narrowly avoided, whispers of lawsuits buried under settlements. My son, the man who strutted in front of the board as if he were untouchable, was drowning in debts and deception. Margaret must have known pieces of it, but now the full picture was in front of me. This was my ace, my weapon, the truth he thought would never see daylight. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He thought he held the reins. In reality, every step he took pulled the noose tighter around his own neck. In the days that followed, I moved quietly but deliberately. I met with Richard to sign additional papers and documents that would secure my position and prepare the way for what was coming. Each time I placed the pen to the paper, I felt the steadiness of my hand, the clarity of my purpose. My reflection in the office window no longer looked like a broken old man. It looked like someone who had been tested, scarred, but not defeated. I replayed David's arrogance in my mind, his dismissive words, his cruel laughter in the boardroom. The memory no longer crushed me. It fueled me, and when I thought about Margaret, about the burden she had carried, I whispered to her picture again and again, "I won't let him win. Not now. Not ever." There was a moment, late one evening, when I opened my phone and scrolled back to his last message. The false sympathy, the shallow words of concern. For a moment, I wondered if I should answer, if I should keep pretending, but I didn't. I deleted the message, just as I had before, and turned off the phone. That small act, that refusal to be manipulated again, was another victory. I said out loud, to no one but the shadows in my room, "They think I've lost, but the game has only begun." And that's when I want to pause and speak to you, the one listening to my story. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, if you've ever had someone close try to erase your sacrifices, I want you to comment just one word. Write the word justice, because that's what this is really about. Not money, not revenge, but justice. By the end of that week, I had everything I needed. Accounts frozen, evidence gathered, secrets uncovered, and most importantly, resolve hardened. When Richard slid the final set of papers across his desk and I signed them, my hand didn't tremble. My voice didn't crack. The pen left a bold line, the kind of signature that spoke of certainty. I set the pen down, leaned back, and exhaled slowly. The weight that had pressed on me since that day in the boardroom felt lighter. Not gone, but shifting, moving onto the shoulders of the one who deserved it. Margaret's letter, David's arrogance, the bank manager's kindness, the accidental email, all of it had led to this moment. The foundation was set. The trap was ready. As I walked out of Richard's office that day, the city street seemed alive in a way I hadn't noticed in months. Cars passed, people hurried along, life moved forward, and so would I. They thought I was beaten, discarded, forgotten, but I had something stronger than their greed. I had truth, and truth, once unleashed, would destroy every lie they tried to build. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I set the living room the way Margaret would have wanted it. Simple, neat, nothing fancy, just chairs pulled in from the dining room and the old quilt folded across the couch. Late afternoon light slid through the west windows, warm and golden, turning the dust in the air into slow snow. The grandfather clock ticked with that steady, patient sound I had heard most of my life. I placed a pitcher of water and a stack of glasses on the coffee table. I set a legal pad by my armchair, even though I knew I wouldn't need to write much. The stack that mattered: bank letters, trust documents, copies of emails. The sealed envelope with Margaret's handwriting sat inside a plain manila folder. It was thicker than it looked. It was heavier than paper should be. Outside, I heard tires on gravel, a door slam, voices my son's bright, confident tone, my daughter-in-law's quick whisper. My neighbor Tom Benton arrived first and gave me a nod that said, "I'm with you." Richard Coleman stepped in behind him, briefcase in hand, coat over his arm, the steady look of a man who had argued hard truths in rooms colder than this one. Emily, my granddaughter, hovered in the doorway, eyes red, hands folded, unsure where to sit in a fight that should never have been hers. David came in last, carrying that leather folder he always brings, the one he flashes like a badge. He didn't ask if he should sit. He took the chair with the best view of the room and set his papers down with a soft thud, like a gavel. He looked around the house he was raised in and smiled as if the place were a stage built for his speech. I didn't rise to greet him. I didn't offer my hand. I kept my seat in the armchair. I've worn into the shape of my bones. I could feel the wood beneath the fabric. I could feel the steadiness in my fingers. The shaking that haunted me in the days after the boardroom humiliation was gone. I folded my hands and let the clock tick. I came because you said this was important, David began. He spoke to Richard more than to me. Let's not drag this out. We all know what's best. Dad needs rest. I need control of the company to ensure stability. That's responsible leadership. He opened his folder and began laying out charts and printed slides, bright bars and bold numbers that promised a future only he could deliver. We can wrap this up tonight. Sign the transfer, and I'll make sure you're comfortable. I let the words fan out, float thin, and disappear. I looked at the papers but did not touch them. Richard remained still. Tom sat with his fingers interlaced, chin down, watching David the way a man watches a storm creep across a field, measuring its shape, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. In the corner, Emily shifted, then went quiet again, her eyes moving from her father's smile to my face. She was searching for something she could trust. I reached for my manila folder and set it on the table without opening it. Before I look at your numbers, I said, there are a few things we need to settle. My voice did not crack. It was low and clear, the way it used to be when I would call the family to the table for dinner. This isn't the boardroom. This is my home. David laughed softly. We all know where we are, Dad. We do, I said, but I'm not the one who needs reminding. He smiled that tight smile that means he thinks he's already won. He slid a sheet toward me, something about projections and growth and new capital rounds. He talked about maximizing value, about timelines, about how quickly we needed to move. He spoke as if time itself worked for him. I let him talk. I wanted him to feel the ground still under his shoes. I wanted him to keep walking. When he paused to take a breath, I reached into my folder and placed a thin letter on top of his charts. A simple letter from the bank with my name, the account numbers, the dates, the words I knew would land like a hammer. As of last week, I said, all accounts connected to me are frozen. You do not have access. No transfers will be approved without my signature. The room shifted. I felt it. His face stayed still for a second too long. The smallest flinch in his left eye. His mouth tried to remember how to smile. He pressed his lips together and glanced at my lawyer, then back to me. That's unnecessary, he said. His voice lost a shade of color. It sends the wrong signal. It sends the right one, I said. We're not moving a nickel until the truth is on the table. He spread his hands as if I'd handed him a warm-up drill. Fine. You want the truth? The company needs leadership. You're tired. You said so yourself. The best way to honor your legacy is to let me manage it. Everyone expects it. Tom cleared his throat. He doesn't talk much, not in rooms like this. He's a retired electrician who fixes fences without telling you and shovels your walk before the sun is up. Everyone doesn't, he said, eyes steady. I've watched Henry these past weeks. He's not confused. He's not weak. He's more present than I've ever seen him. He's steady. He turned to me and nodded, then looked back at David. He knows what he's doing. David's eyes flicked to Tom with that look he gives anyone who can't write a check big enough to matter. He shrugged him off and lifted another page from his folder. Numbers and arrows stacked like brick walls. These are projections from our last quarter, he said. We've had record profitability. Investors are excited. We just need to sign a few documents to speed things along. Richard's voice came in soft, careful, like a blade that doesn't flash until it cuts. Those projections, he said, do not match your filed statements. He tapped a separate page from my folder. And they don't match the numbers your auditors certified. David's head snapped to Richard. You're confused. Those are preliminary decks for potential partners. Preliminary decks, Richard repeated, not asking. He lifted the page, glanced at it again, and set it down. He didn't push. He didn't need to. He knew what was coming. He had built this path with me, brick by brick, paper by paper. David looked back at me like a coach looks at an old player who doesn't understand the new rules. Dad, this isn't adversarial. I'm offering you comfort. I'm offering you dignity. Comfort, I said. Dignity. I let the words sit. Then I slid a printed email into the center of the table. It was the one I had received by accident. The subject line stared up, erasing the old man. The first line sat bold as a bruise. He's a useless relic. Prepare the paperwork to seize the remainder of his shares." The room went quiet in a new way. Not silence, not the ordinary pause of a conversation. It was the sound the air makes when it takes 3 steps back. David reached for the page and froze when he saw the date and his assistant's name. His jaw twitched. "This is out of context," he said. "It's a draft. It was never meant—" "For me to read?" I said. "I know." Emily's breath caught. She looked at her father, back to me, then down at her hands. Tom sat straighter, like a man who hears thunder finally cracking where he knew it would. Richard folded his fingers and waited. He knew the rhythm. Light, thunder, rain. David rushed to fill the space. He talked faster, words tumbling over each other, promising this, explaining that, painting pictures of a future too bright to doubt. He told me he had always planned to take care of me, that the words in the email were just internal shorthand, that young teams use rough phrases not meant for old ears. I let him try to erase what I had read. I let him tug at a stain that only spread the more he scrubbed. I didn't raise my voice. I opened the folder and took out the next layer. "We're not done," I said. "There's something else you need to hear." I turned to Richard and nodded. He pulled a small digital recorder from his briefcase and set it on the table. He pressed play. The room filled with Margaret's voice. She sounded brave. She sounded tired. She sounded like the woman who had held this family together with her hands when the nails bent and the board split. "If Henry is hearing this," she said, "it means I couldn't find the right moment to say it to his face. David, you called me 2 months ago. You told me that if your father didn't step aside, you'd make sure the papers ran a story that would humiliate him. You said he was old and in the way, and you would teach him to be quiet. I need you to hear me. That is cruelty, and I will not be part of it." Emily covered her mouth. Tom looked at the floor and blinked back, something he didn't want the room to see. David's face went hot, then pale, then set. "Fake," he said. "It's manipulated. She would never—" Richard stopped the recorder. "Margaret emailed that file to me the day she recorded it. She asked me to hold it in confidence until Henry needed it. I preserved the metadata and the original. It's authentic." David turned on me then, anger and panic finally finding each other. "So this is what this is," he said. "An ambush. You dug up Mom's private messages. You and your lawyer cooked this up to make me look like a monster." "You did that yourself," I said. "Margaret tried to save you from it." He stood, then sat again, fingers drumming on the folder he had brought like it could still change the weather. He reached for one last trick. He pulled out an old letter, my words from years ago, where I had written that the company would one day be his. He held it up like a cross to a vampire. "You promised," he said. "Here it is, in writing. You promised you'd hand it to me." I remembered that letter. I remembered the night I wrote it. Pride and hope had bled into my pen. I looked at it now and felt nothing but the ache of a man who had believed too quickly. "I promised a son who honored his family," I said. "Not a man who would erase it." The letter dropped to the table and slid a little, as if it wanted to run away. Richard opened his briefcase and removed a thin blue folder. He slid it forward. "This," he said, "is the current estate plan and trust instrument, executed last week. It supersedes any informal letters or intentions from the past." He tapped the first page. "It recognizes Henry's capacity. It memorializes his right to control his assets. It names a successor trustee and outlines the distribution of the estate." He turned a page. "It also states clearly that any beneficiary who challenges the plan in court and loses forfeits their share." David laughed, but there was nothing in it. "You think a piece of paper scares me?" Richard didn't answer. He slid another document forward. "And these are notices from the bank. The household accounts $300,000 are frozen. The house valued last month at $600,000 is protected by the trust. The company's shares held personally by Henry are not transferable without his written consent." David stared. He blinked. He picked up the bank notice, scanned the lines, and set it down with a hand that trembled. "You think you've boxed me out," he said. "But you don't know how deals work. I have commitments. I have plans." "You had them," I said, "before this conversation, before we play the next thing." I opened the folder to the deepest layer, the one that had cut me when I first saw it. The copies of debts Richard had found in public records. The settlements. the late notices tucked into companies he thought would hide him, and, at last, the email David had sent to his team about inflating margins for potential investor decks, the slide labels that said more than he wanted them to say. I did not scatter these like confetti. I laid them out in a line, like bricks in a path, with one end and one end only. You did not stumble, I said. You planned. You did not exaggerate. You falsified. You did not protect me. You targeted me. Oh? He pushed back in his chair. His jaw tightened. He started talking too quickly again, stringing words in a rope that slipped through his hands as he pulled. He said auditors sign off on adjustments. He said every founder massages numbers for roadshows. He said every old man remembers things in a way that suits his pride. He said Tom was a meddler. He said Richard was a manipulator. He said the bank manager had misunderstood. He ran out of people to blame when he ran out of breath. I kept my voice low. You called me a relic, I said. You tried to erase me. You told your mother you'd smear me to shut me up. You told your team to prepare the papers to take what I built with $25,000 out of my retirement. You knew what we had sacrificed. You knew beans and rice, winter coats that waited another season, and an anniversary trip we never took. You knew, and you used it. Emily spoke then, soft but clear. Dad, she said, and her voice cracked over the word. Is any of it true? He didn't look at her when he answered. He talked to the air. He talked to a mirror that used to admire him. It's business, he said. It's how things work. In the silence that followed, the house felt larger than it had in years. The walls that had held so many birthdays and holidays now held a truth too heavy to ignore. Tom leaned forward and spoke for the second time. I've known Henry 30 years, he said. I've seen him shovel his own walk after back surgery because he wanted to keep moving. I watched him cash a bond to help cover your tuition. I watched him repair this porch with his hands when the wood split in a storm. He isn't confused. He isn't cruel. He's careful. He's fair. Tom looked at me and then at Richard. If you ask me, you've shown enough. David reached for his folder as if he could build a wall in a room that no longer belonged to him. He picked up the old letter again, the one where I'd promised him a future, and he pushed it across the table like it still had power. You said the company would be mine, he repeated, a little boy's plea in a grown man's throat. His wife Ashley, who had been quiet until now, leaned toward him and whispered something too low for anyone else to hear. He jerked his shoulder away from her and said louder, We did everything for you, Dad. We kept the company modern. We brought in investors. We made it worth something. I lifted Margaret's sealed letter, the one with my name in her hand. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't need to. I summarized it the way a husband summarizes the last true thing he ever heard from the person who knew him best. She wanted the truth to be what we lived by, I said. Not the numbers you show a room to make them clap. Not the stories you tell yourself to sleep. The truth. I set her letter beside the bank notices and the public records. The table looked like a map out of a foreign country. All the roads pointed in the same direction. Richard cleared his throat and clicked open his pen. His tone was formal now, not cold, but official. For the record, he said, we are serving notice of intent. If any party attempts to encumber Henry Walker's assets, including the residence at 114 Maple Lane, appraised at $600,000, or attempts any transfer of personal shares held in Walker Holdings without Henry's express written consent, we will seek injunctive relief and damages. He slid a short letter, already signed, across to David and Ashley. You will also receive copies of our filings regarding misrepresentation to prospective investors. We're not litigating that here tonight, but we will be litigating it. David laughed again, a brittle sound that broke at the edges. You think the board will back you? You think the street cares about this little family melodrama? You think a judge will risk jobs and growth because an old man got his feelings hurt? I didn't stand. I didn't clench my fists. I didn't let anger fog the one clear thing I had. It's not about my feelings, I said. It's about the $300,000 you tried to move without my permission. It's about the $600,000 house you wanted to sell to fund your plans. It's about the $25,000 from my retirement that kept the doors open when your numbers didn't add up. It's about the promise you made to Margaret when you were 24 years old and crying at our kitchen table, saying you would build this with integrity. I looked at the recorder, still on the table, the little red light off, still impatient. You broke that promise. The court will decide the rest. Ashley's face went white. She turned to him, voice rising. You told me the loans were old, she said. You said they were settled. You told me the numbers were clean. He waved a hand at her and said something about context and timing, about how none of it mattered if they just got through the next quarter. She stared at him like a person who had just found a room in their own house they didn't know existed. A cold room. A locked room. You said it was an opportunity, she whispered. You said he would never fight. I took a breath, slow and steady, and reached for the last page in my folder. It was not a threat. It was a promise. I've set up a scholarship fund in Margaret's name, I said. A significant portion of my estate will go there. The house will remain in trust until I pass, at which point it will be sold, and the proceeds will be split between the fund and the person in this family who has shown me respect and kindness without asking for anything in return. I looked at Emily. Her eyes filled, and she shook her head as if to say she hadn't earned it. That was why she had. David's voice cracked on the first word. You can't. I can, I said. And I have. Any challenge triggers a no contest clause. You risk losing what remains. He stood so quickly his chair tipped and clattered against the hardwood. He pointed at Richard, then at Tom, then at Emily, anywhere but at me. This is manipulation, he said. You've poisoned him. You've turned him against his own son. He slammed his palm on the table, once, twice. A dull drum no one marched to anymore. Everything I did was for the company. For yourself, I said, and we both know it. He grabbed his folder and stuffed his papers back into it, crooked and crumpled now. The smooth stacks that had looked like confidence were just paper again. He moved toward the door, then turned back with one more flailing swipe. You'll regret this, he said. When the company stumbles because you froze accounts, when the market turns, when the board asks where you've been, you'll regret this. I did not. I felt something I hadn't felt since the day Margaret and I signed the papers to buy this house. The clean weight of a decision made for the right reason. I will sleep, I said. That's what I will do. He hesitated, waiting for me to wobble, to call his name, to offer him the easy path one more time. I didn't. Ashley looked at him, then at me, then back at him. You told me it was a misunderstanding, she said, each word sharp and separate. It's not. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and nothing came out that belonged in a room where truth had finally taken a seat. He turned and left. The door slammed harder than it needed to, like a man trying to convince a house to agree with him. Silence took a slow step into the room, then another. Richard gathered the documents with the care of a man packing tools that had just done the work they were made to do. Tom stood and put a hand on my shoulder, light but steady, the way a friend helps you up from a chair after a long day. Emily crossed the room and hugged me. I felt her shoulders shake. I patted her back and told her it would be all right. I believed it, not because the fight was over, but because the ground I stood on had finally stopped sliding. Richard cleared his throat. One more thing, he said, and he handed me a short letter marked received. The court clerk stamped our petition for temporary relief this afternoon. If anyone attempts a transfer, we call the judge's chambers. We're not going to chase shadows. We're going to protect what's here. I held the paper. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like armor. Thank you, I said. The words were simple. They had to be. Anything more would have broken the surface of the calm that had settled over me. Tom looked at the clock and then at the window where dusk had softened into night. You want me to make some coffee? He asked. I laughed, a small sound that surprised me with its ease. I think I'll sleep better without it, I said. He smiled and squeezed my shoulder before he slipped out, promising to check the back gate, because that's what he does. Emily stayed a few minutes longer. She wiped her eyes and told me she loved me, and I told her I knew. She asked me if I was sure about the scholarship and the trust, if I didn't want to hold on to the house longer. It's my home, I said. It will be until it needs to be someone else's blessing. She kissed my cheek and left in a careful hurry, like a person who had set something down and didn't want to knock it over as she walked away. Richard waited until the room emptied. He packed his briefcase, closed the clasps, and looked at me with that measuring look lawyers use when they want to be certain their client is standing exactly where they think he is. "You did well," he said. "You were steady." I felt steady," I said. "For the first time in a long while." He nodded. "Tomorrow I'll file the follow-ups. The bank will confirm the freezes. We'll send notices to the board. We're not going to broadcast. We're going to document." He paused, then added softer, "Margaret would be proud." I looked at the sealed envelope one more time. I pressed my thumb against her name. The paper was smooth and cool. I didn't need to open it again. I knew what it said. I knew what she had trusted me to do. "I hope so," I said. After Richard left, the house settled. The refrigerator hummed. The heat clicked on, sighed through the vents, and went quiet again. I walked to the mantel and straightened the wedding photo that always leans a little. I looked at her smile and the tilt of her head, and for a moment I could almost hear her laugh from the kitchen, that warm sound she made when something small and good happened for no special reason. I stood there longer than I meant to, letting the day wash over me in slow waves. Relief, sadness, resolve. They drifted in and ebbed out, each one leaving the floor a little cleaner. I locked the front door and turned off the lamp in the corner. In the dark, the house did not feel empty. It felt held. I sat back down in the armchair and let my hands rest on the arms, palms warm against the fabric. I watched the little red light on the recorder, now off, and I thought about how a voice can live in a machine and in a man at the same time. Margaret had given me the truth. I had carried it into the room. It had done what truth does when you don't flinch. It had stood up. There will be consequences. I know that. The board will call. The street will gossip. David will rage. He may try to rally allies. He may throw sand until his hands are empty. But the accounts are frozen. The house is in trust. The scholarship is funded. The no contest clause is in place. The filings are stamped. The recorders are preserved. The neighbors know. The lawyer knows. Most important, I know, the plan we built in the quiet of Richard's office has started to breathe in the open air. It will hold. I closed my eyes and took one slow breath, then another. In that stillness, a soft ache opened in my chest, the kind that comes when a weight you've carried for too long finally shifts and you can feel the muscle beneath it. I let that ache be what it was. A sign of life. A sign of work done. A sign of work yet to do. If you are listening to this, and you know what it is to be overlooked, what it is to be told you're a relic in your own home, then you know the sting that sits behind the eyes and the heat that climbs your throat. That feeling is real. That hurt is real. And if you believe every person deserves respect, without price, without bargaining, then say it with me. Type the word respect. Now watch what they do to try to take it back, and watch what we do to change it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I remember the morning the judge's order came through. Richard handed me the stamped papers, his voice steady as always. "It's done, Henry," he said. "The accounts are secured. The trust is binding. David has no legal standing left." I nodded, letting the words sink in. It wasn't joy I felt at first. It was relief. The kind that rolls through your chest like a wave that's been waiting to crash for too long. I closed my eyes and whispered to Margaret's picture on the mantel, "It's over, sweetheart. We did it." The house felt different after that day. It wasn't the same home where laughter once bounced off the walls, where birthdays and anniversaries had been marked with balloons and cake. It had become a battleground, soaked in betrayal and accusations. I knew I couldn't stay. So, I made the decision to sell. The realtor came, walked through the rooms, and told me it would fetch $650,000 easily in the current market. I signed the papers without hesitation. I didn't cling to the walls or the floorboards. Memories live in us, not in the drywall. Within 2 months, the house was gone, and with it, the weight of betrayal that clung to every corner. I moved into a small condo on the edge of town. 2 bedrooms, one for me and one for guests, with a balcony that overlooked a quiet park. Children laughed in the playground below, their voices floating up like reminders that innocence still exists. The condo cost $200,000, and I paid in full. No mortgage, no debt, just a set of keys and a fresh start. I unpacked my books, hung the wedding photo in the hallway, and placed Margaret's old teacup on the windowsill. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. David's downfall came fast after that. The board turned on him. Investors backed away when Richard's filings exposed the inflated numbers. The SEC opened an investigation into his financial dealings. His house, the one with the long driveway and the pool out back, went up for sale. Word spread quickly in a town like ours. By the time the dust settled, David and Ashley had moved into a rented apartment above a strip mall. People whispered when they passed him on the street. He no longer held his head high. He avoided eye contact, as if every glance carried judgment. He tried once to call me. I saw his name flash on the phone, and my hand hovered over the button. But I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear excuses or apologies. I had chosen my peace over his words. One morning, a letter came in the mail with no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. David's. I opened it slowly, sitting at the small kitchen table in my condo. The words were filled with regret, admissions of mistakes, promises that he hadn't meant to hurt me. He wrote that he had been blinded by ambition, that he had let greed hollow him out. At the bottom, he asked for forgiveness. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer. I didn't tear it up, but I didn't respond either. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about giving him a second chance. It was about refusing to let bitterness build a home in my heart. I don't need their apology, I whispered. I have myself. I have my life. I began to fill my days with things I had set aside for decades. Gardening on the condo balcony became my joy. I planted herbs in small pots, basil, rosemary, mint, and watched them grow under the soft morning sunday. I joined a local community center, where I signed up for watercolor classes. My first painting was clumsy, blotches of blue and green that looked nothing like the river scene I had intended. But I smiled as I set it aside, knowing the process was more important than the result. Neighbors invited me to barbecues, and I went. I made friends with Tom's cousin, who lived nearby, and we played cards every Thursday evening. Laughter found me again, not in grand moments, but in these small, ordinary ones. I donated $100,000 from the sale of the house to create a scholarship fund in Margaret's name. The local high school held a ceremony, and the first recipient was a quiet girl who wanted to study nursing. As she thanked me with tears in her eyes, I felt Margaret beside me. Her legacy lived not in stone walls or dollar signs, but in opportunities for others to rise. Meanwhile, David faded further into the background. Word reached me that he had been let go from his last consulting job. He tried to network, but doors stayed shut. Ashley left him after months of bitter arguments. I heard he lived alone now, renting a one-bedroom apartment, still chasing deals that never came through. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard it. I felt distance, as if he were a figure in a story I had read long ago. His world had collapsed because he built it on lies. Mine had survived because I rebuilt it on truth. Sometimes, late at night, I still wondered if things could have been different, if I had drawn boundaries earlier, if I had been firmer about teaching him that love isn't a checkbook, but regret is a trap. I had to remind myself. The past can't be rewritten, only learned from. Parents give until their hearts ache, but love without boundaries is not love, it is permission for destruction. Children who mistake sacrifice for weakness end up hollow. And in this world, where money shouts so loudly, it's easy to forget that character whispers the only words that matter. One evening, as I returned from the park, a little girl from the building ran up to me. She held out a cookie wrapped in a napkin. "I made this with my grandma," she said shyly. I took it, thanked her, and watched her skip back to her door. That small gesture, so pure, reminded me that kindness still exists in this world. It reminded me that I had been right to step away from the poison of betrayal and toward the warmth of community. Looking back now, I see 3 lessons. For parents, love your children, but set boundaries. Teach them gratitude, not entitlement. For children, remember the hands that built your future. Betrayal may give you wealth for a season, but it will strip you of dignity forever. And for all of us, in a world obsessed with money, never forget that character is the one inheritance no one can steal. I sit now on my balcony, a cup of tea steaming in Margaret's cup. The herbs sway in the evening breeze. I whisper to myself, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. I have my peace. The condo is quiet, but it is full of life. Every laugh from the playground, every bird that lands on the railing, every small kindness from a neighbor reminds me that this is where I was meant to land. If you've been listening, maybe you've felt the sting of betrayal in your own family. Maybe you've carried the weight of sacrifice that went unnoticed. Maybe you've wondered if peace was possible after such wounds. It is. I found it. And so can you. Tell me, which lesson from my story speaks to you the most? Comment below. I want to read every word you share. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.